Welcome to another episode of The Art of Feminine Negotiation. I am your host, Cindy Watson, and I'm really excited to be introducing Monick Halm today. Welcome, Monique. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Cindy. It's great to be here.
And today, for our listeners out there, we're going to be talking about negotiating as a real estate investor goddess. And Monique is perfectly positioned to chat about that. She is an advocate for women to create passive income streams through real estate investing. And her mission is actually to assist 1 million women to achieve financial freedom through real estate. She's the founder of the Real Estate Investor Goddesses, which I just love that name. And she herself is a real estate investor and syndicator with experience in multifamily homes, mobile homes, RV parks, flipping, commercial, vacation rentals, ground up development, you name it. Monique has done it. She teaches it, and she can help you learn how to do that as well. And together with her husband and her investors, she owns over 1,300 rental units across 6 states. And she's the #1 best-selling author of the Real Estate Investor Goddess Handbook, as well as Wealth for Women. And if that's not enough, she's also the host of the Real Estate Investor Goddess podcast. Make sure to check that out. And I also, as an attorney myself, particularly love that she self-identifies as a recovering attorney. I think that's so perfect. So, Monique, why don't you tell us a little bit about how and why you came to this business? It's not a traditional business for women. So I love that you do this and that you have the Real Estate Goddess Investors. So how do you get there?
Yeah, a lot by accident. I started as an attorney. Growing up, I had great parents who said, Monique, you can be anything you want, in parentheses though, as long as you're a doctor, lawyer, professor, engineer. So for them, that was what success was. And of those choices, I chose law. So I went to law school, was in a big law firm. And the only thing I'd ever been taught about real estate was to buy your own house. And so I went to do that. This was in Los Angeles in 2005. Los Angeles is a very expensive market. A starter home in a semi-decent neighborhood. I'm not talking about a palace in Bel Air or Beverly Hills, which is a little in a neighborhood where you're not going to have drive-by shootings. It was, in 2005, we were looking upwards of $600,000, $700,000 US dollars.
Wow.
And so even though I had a decent salary as a lawyer, I couldn't afford that alone. I ended up buying a 2-unit property, although there was a converted garage in the back. That was kind of like a third unit, not legal, but so I was able to rent out the upper unit, the back house, and even our basement. So I was house hacking before I knew that was a thing. So I became a landlord just to afford a house, and then I went, wait, these people are paying my mortgage. This is awesome.
Yeah, there's something to this.
Yeah, it was great. And then, I was working as a lawyer. I was actually very, very unhappy. Just to give you a little snippet of how unhappy. One Tuesday morning, I found myself in the emergency room when the doctor told me that my appendix had ruptured and I'd be at the hospital for several days. I ended up being in the hospital for 9 days. Wow. And then I'd have at least 30 days afterwards to recover. My first thought when he told me this was, oh, thank God I don't have to go to work for at least 30 days.
I saw that coming. I tell you, I hear you. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a sign you need a change.
That's a sign you need a change. Well, my next thought was, oh, like what? Like I didn't realize how bad it was until that moment. But I'd done everything right. I'd followed the path. I did everything I was told to do. Undergraduate, grad school, big law firm, partnership track. I was doing all the things and I was that unhappy. So real estate really came as a blessing, but it wasn't something that I even thought of initially. At first, I just thought it was free housing, like and tax benefits too. And then I met my husband. He had a duplex, and then we got a single family rental together. And when I was 5.5 months pregnant, I was working in I kept trying different law firms. Yeah. Like that one with the appendicitis, I was like, that was bad. I need to change. So I went to another big law firm, then I was to a law firm. So I was at the little law firm, still unhappy, not quite as miserable, but still pretty unhappy.
Yeah.
And though I probably would have stayed because I was pregnant, and then my boss called me into his office. I was expecting a bonus because I've been working so hard, but instead I got fired. And so that was a surprise, and not a welcome surprise, but
Yeah.
it ended up being a real gift.
Yeah.
Like I thought, I'm pregnant. I'm going to wait till after I give birth. I have a short maternity period. Then I will look for a job. And my daughter was born late August of 2008. Within a month, the markets were in free fall here. In a couple
Yeah.
months from that, my husband's graphic design business was down 90%. It was not a really great time to be looking for work.
Yeah.
And it was a really stressful time. But what saved us were the couple of real estate properties that we had.
Yeah.
And they managed to keep a roof over our heads, and we sold one, and we started flipping houses when houses were on sale at that time. And we did that until about 2015. And then I learned about bringing groups of investors together to purchase larger properties. And in 2016, I started to do that. So that's when we started going to large multifamily and mobile home parks and RV parks. And now we're doing mostly industrial. So
Yeah.
factories and things like that. So I've loved my journey. I didn't love all of the journey, but I love where I am
Yeah.
now.
Oh, the legal profession can be brutal. It kind of chews us up and spits us out. I mean, women leave the professional law at double the rate that men do. And there's reasons for that. So I hear you on that. And it's funny about real estate because I so love that you're doing this and helping teach and guide other women, educate them about how to be real estate investment goddesses with intention. Because I think most women that I know who are in real estate, like you, kind of fell into it by accident, myself included, to be honest, because I grew up in a low rental apartment complex. So, I was always in an apartment, this small little container. And, I laugh sometimes that I have the Duddy Kravitz. I'm dating myself here now, but the Duddy Kravitz syndrome. I don't know if you remember that movie, The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz. And he came from nothing and he just always wanted more, right? Needed more space. And I was like one of those boom, if you'd be driving, you'd see a for sale sign. It was just like, oh, property. And again, we started by sort of small and came into it by accident. So I'd love to hear though, because the industry definitely tends to be very male dominated, and beautiful goddesses like you are changing that. But I wondered if you could speak to your experience, as a woman and how that's impacted how you show up.
Yeah. So I had, so for a lot of the time I was doing real estate, we're sort of bumbling around without knowing what we were doing, to be quite honest.
Yes.
And then when I decide to start syndicating, bring groups of investors together, I was like, I need to get an education, learn how to do this, especially if we're taking on other people's money,
Yeah.
and we're going to be a fiduciary. So I started going to these real estate conferences. And I remember the first one I went to, there were 120 people there, and it was a 2-day conference. It was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday morning. I'm in the hotel gym, just going through the elliptical, going through what I'd learned, and they're talking about, build your brand, build your network. Who do you want to work with? And I'm thinking about this room that had 120 people, and maybe 8 were women, 2 of which I think were working in the back. So
Yeah.
women, and it came as this divine download to
Yeah.
bring women into this room. Like I wanted to work with women in between doing what I do now in law. Actually became a coach, and I was coaching women around money and abundance. And so I was already working with women in this area, but the marriage of the real estate just came to me. It's like, this is your mission. Should you choose to accept it?
Yeah.
And I was like, it was like this whole body. Yes. Not that I had no idea how. I'm still figuring that out, but the what of it. And so, because bringing women in, it's such a masculine world. I was familiar with that world, being a corporate litigator.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time being the only woman in the room.
Yep.
No, and I got into real estate, especially when I was doing commercial real estate. It's higher level, and I joined a high-end real estate mastermind. Had 19 men and me.
Wow.
So I was used to it, but I didn't like it. And I'd been studying the divine feminine for, since it started in 2004.
Yeah.
And so that, like, how do you show up in this feminine way, and the power that you have when you show up in this, in that feminine. So a lot of people think that it's weak when you show up, feminine, and it can, immature feminine can be weak, right? When
Yeah,
you show up trying to manipulate, or but when you show up just like in your authentic feminine, I
absolutely.
find it's super powerful. Um, People are attracted to that, and I think men, they're wired to help. They want to help, and when you can, I I find that when I'm communicating with men and just really clearly letting them know how they can help and be a hero and be of service, and they're like so happy and thrilled to do that,
Yeah.
and we can find very win-wins that make everyone happier.
Yeah. And I'd love you to go a little deeper on that because it's funny because we have very similar paths, but I'm not in real estate. I'm doing that same thing, as you know, for female attorneys now, like on that mission to help women really leverage, sort of their innate feminine strength and quit seeing it as a liability, recognize it as your greatest asset, right? But I do get a lot of pushback about using that term about sort of the art of feminine negotiation or what that means. So I love that you own that divine feminine. And I'd love you to speak to that a little bit, right? What does that mean for you? How does that actually show up?
How does that show up? So when I'm in this, well, first of all, it's like in my beingness, right? So showing up, partly it is showing up with pleasure. So I find that the more masculine way
Yeah.
is to man up, muscle through. We're like work hard, like it's like super aggressive, and being, for me being in the feminine, it's the pleasure path. So if I find myself beating, like I'm beating my head against the wall, I'm feeling stuck, I'm at an impasse, I need a pleasure break,
Yeah.
and I need to either add pleasure to the moment if I can't
Yeah.
disengage from it, or I have to just, best is to go off, do something pleasurable, come back, and then things open up. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
Another thing with regards to the feminine is being really trusting my intuition,
Yes.
that we have as women, right? Where our brains are wired in such a way that both of our hemispheres of our brain have connections that men's do not. The women's intuition is a real thing. Everyone's intuitive, but
Yeah.
I think women are even more so because of the
Yeah.
way our brains are wired.
Yeah.
And but we're not often taught to trust it. We're not often taught to follow it. And so I have learned the hard way that when I ignore that
Yeah.
intuitive guidance,
Oh,
so
there is a price. Yes.
when I follow it, I'm happy. When I don't,
Yeah.
I'm not. So I follow that in very, very clearly, and that leads me well. Um, Also, with regards to showing up in the feminine, I believe that the feminine model is not, it's like a masculine model can be, it's win lose.
Yeah.
It can be like, I get, you get this, like
Yeah.
there's a pie, like I want more pie, you get less pie, and then I'm happy. It's like this, versus the feminine model, I think is more, it's cooperative, it's
Yeah.
co-elevation as opposed to competition.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. So
Oh,
it's how can this work for all of us? How can we all win?
yeah.
Like how can we like work together to take everybody else higher?
Gosh, it's so funny. I mean, so parallel in those different streams because that's my mission as well, as you know, right? That whole idea, I call it the art of feminine negotiation, but whatever you call it, it's this idea about getting away from that masculine definition of success. Like for so long, we've been conditioned to define success, whether in the practice of law or in business or in life, based on that more competitive, there are winners and losers, it's all about winning and getting your piece, as you say, versus I mean, I have really come to believe, as it sounds like you do, that, when we help lift each other up, everybody lifts up and you actually come up with better, more creative outcomes that are better than there's no such thing as, sort of win lose, or even win-win in the way most people use it, with that splitting the baby and everybody walking away sort of marginally happy or equally unhappy, but coming up with solutions that are better than either party thought they wanted when they came there. So I love this idea about applying that to real estate and investment as a life model, and beautiful. So
real estate can be so win-win, and it really does not have to, because there's somebody who wants to let go of a property for whatever reason, there's somebody else who wants to buy it, and they can, like, the owner, the seller wins, the buyer wins, the tenants can win, the whole, everyone who's connected to the transaction can win.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of ways in which it is very beneficial, but showing up that way. And I'll only invest if I can leave a property and community better than I found it.
I love that. I love that. So what tips do you have for our sort of women listeners or viewers out there who may be nervous or hesitant about stepping into this business? It's something new, probably haven't thought about it. What tips do you have for them about getting over that?
Yeah. So one of the things that is really important first is to get an education. So a lot of the times, if you don't know what you don't know, and we also have a lot of myths that there's like a quote attributed to Mark Twain: "It ain't what you don't know that hurt you, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so." And I think that's often the case with real estate, that there's a lot of myths that people have. You know, everything from, okay, well, I can't invest in real estate until I buy my own house. Or that I have to have, there's myths about the amount of money you have to have, or the amount of time, or the connections you need to have, or there's a lot of different myths that people, or that if you become a landlord, it's like being a slumlord, and you're going to have to be like this terrible person that evicts people, and that's not. Those are all myths. And so partly it's letting go of those things, learning those things that you think are true that aren't true, and then also, how do you do it? Because the more knowledge you have, the more creative you can be in terms of how things can go, and you can see opportunities that you didn't even see, and you can avoid those mistakes, because mistakes can be costly. Real estate, this is the most expensive thing most people ever buy. And if you you can make mistakes, and they will be expensive and painful. So real estate or education is the best way to minimize those.
Beautiful.
So that would be the first thing that I would recommend. And then, once you have that, you have an education and you know what's possible, because real estate investing is not one size fits all. There are a lot of different ways of doing this. People from all different, you can start at $0 and up, or you can start with very minimal time and expand. Right? So if you're like, I don't have the time, or there are passive ways of investing, or I don't have the money. Like, well, there are ways of starting that are free. Honestly, I mean, they take time and some know-how, but there are ways to do it. So once you do that, then it really is about relationships, and it's very much a relationship business. It's a team sport, and the more that the better your team. And this is where a lot of what you talk about, where that comes in, is in terms of the negotiation, and just like, which I think is about relationship.
I love that.
So it's, how do you create relationships that serve everybody involved? And so it's having, getting into a relationship with people. And I truly believe in have a relationships for life philosophy. So I want to work with people, and great people, and I want us to work together again and again and again.
Yeah, I love that.
Not be transactional and one-off. So
and I love that you talk about busting through those myths, because I do think that's a biggie. And I would add, even for the women out there who haven't thought about real estate and are maybe nervous about it, is one of the myths to bust as well, is the idea that Monique was just talking about, and we were chatting about, that myth that success is based on that masculine model, right? That if you think that coming to real estate means that you have to bring that take no prisoners approach, that you're going to have to be really ruthless, that's not the case. And I love this reframing. I'm big on reframing. I love the idea about reframing this as being able to show up with that divine feminine energy, right? Because show up in a way that's authentic to you, whatever that means. So I love that. And I'd be interested in you chatting about sort of the voice issue. I did a TEDx talk on the rise of the feminine voice, and it got me thinking in advance of this interview about the feminine voice in the world of investment. So do you have any thoughts on that in terms of voice showing up in as a real estate investment goddess, or negotiating your way through that process?
Yeah. Well, I believe that it's so important that more and more women show up and share their voice in this world, because of the way that we can be cooperative versus competitive, because of our, I think the fact that we are better at relationship. We're not going to try to be like slumlords that will take every dollar out of the deal, right? We care about the people that we interact with, and how what we do affects them. And so I love that we can help get more women into this game, and using their voice and showing up. As women, once we're in the game, we do tend to be more successful than men as investors, because of our skills with relationship, and I think we have innate negotiation skills.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's my whole premise, is that, just tap into that authentic, that you just don't think of it at negotiation, but these are skills you use every day, and they are the key traits that make a mark the most effective negotiators. So what advice or tips would you have now, because recognizing that, hey, men do have this different approach typically, right? That more masculine energy. What advice or tips would you have for negotiating with bullies, or negotiating with people who have more power or try to exert power over?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So sometimes it's like, don't. Right? Don't. It's like, it may not be worth it to somebody's like, really, because when you're I'm going to talk about from the standpoint of the buyer. So there are things that are important when you're buying a property, right? It's like the stats of the property and the price of the property, but it's also the seller, right? So it's does the seller willing? Is the seller motivated? Is the seller and if they're just so hard-headed and just like, they can't see the value, or the value of what they have, or they're not willing. It's like, sometimes it's not worth it to just be like, okay, next, right?
Yeah.
Like, you don't necessarily have to engage with people that are super difficult. And sometimes if it's just like, if it's that much of a wall, it's like, part of, I think, what has helped me a lot, even from relationships and finding my husband, and doing everything, is I've always had this feeling like, if it's not this, it's because God, the universe, has something better for me.
Yeah.
So if it feels like this is not this, it's because it's better. It's not this because it's better. And that is actually really helpful when you're negotiating, because you're not like, sometimes when you're still like, it must be this, it must be right, like you're like holding on to it, like, if this doesn't work out, like, I'm going to, then you're in a really weak position, because you think like you're like, it must be this. Or when I was in the relationship, like I met my husband, and I felt, oh my gosh, he's the one, like, immediately when I met him. But I was, I'd had this practice, like, okay, if it's not him, then I was super excited. I was like, he's like perfect, but if it's not him, oh my gosh, it's better. So I actually was like not weird. Like, what might otherwise have been really weird, like, oh, it's him. It's like, I can't, because needy is creepy.
Yeah.
So having that philosophy of okay, I love being with you and you seem perfect, but if you're not perfect, then I just want you to be happy and I'll be happy knowing that there's something better.
I love
You
it.
know, if this isn't it, then it's just better. So like showing up with that with property too. Like if it's not it, then it's better. So
Yeah.
you come up, you show up and you try, but if there's like a brick wall and somebody's being like totally hard ass and annoying, then it's like, okay,
Yeah. Well, and
and
this
it's
is
better. So that's one thing.
so consistent with your idea about that pleasure path, right? I love this one. Again, it's funny. I mean, that brings up a lot for me. I mean, I love this idea about the pleasure, because I confess I am guilty sometimes, and ironically, I mean, I coach women against this, but every once in a while we get that driver, striver, achiever, and then we forget to show up with that divine feminine energy, because there's been so much conditioning going the other way, and it takes that reminder that the journey needs to be joyful. This needs to be pleasurable. I love that. And it's funny because even on that issue, and I love that idea about no attachment. I mean, one of the models that I teach, I call it no fear negotiating. It's FEAR, know your fears, right? Is it that fear of rejection, fear of the no, fear of the unknown, fear of missing out? Don't be showing up with ego. And the A is attachment, right? Don't get so attached to any one result that you continue to negotiate past the point that it makes sense for you. And yet it's funny because when I talk about the idea about negotiating with bullies, I mean, I've written blog posts and gone on about all of these strategies you can use when you're dealing with bullies or people trying to exert power over. And I don't know that I've ever actually just said the obvious, which is just don't, right? So I love that. That's great.
Sometimes you have to, right? Especially, so you're talking to lawyers and you're
Sure.
like, you're advocating for your client. You're
Sure.
forced to be on the other side with
Yeah.
somebody who is really tough. So,
Yeah.
for me, then I try to, this is going to be a little, so first it's like really looking, it's like, what's their interest? But even
Yeah.
beyond that, I have a I often think about higher power, and I sort of say, just like guide me in this,
Yeah.
and just speak through me, and whatever is the highest and best outcome in
Yeah.
this situation, then and do that. And I just allow I'm kind of willing to be a channel for whatever shows up. Really thinking in terms of service,
Yeah.
and for a higher good. So
Mm.
I do try to really listen to the other person and really try to see like what is their interest, like what are their needs
Yeah.
that they are trying to meet.
Yeah.
And that's like often bullies, it's very significance driven. And it's just like what else is there, and just try to really listen and hear
Yeah.
so that I can find, I mean, maybe there's a way of connection. There's a higher
Yeah.
way.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that. And so much of that again goes back to that's that divine feminine that you speak of, right? Or, I call it the art of feminine negotiation, but that same principle, because, that service, when you talk about service, I mean, that tends to be a beautifully feminine approach. And, a lot of studies now are showing that women who are, in business, tend in much higher numbers to end up donating and doing philanthropic work, and that. So that idea about coming from a place of service is beautiful. That idea about wanting to meet the needs of the other party, truly understand them. I mean, that's so much a foundation of what I believe is that the art of feminine negotiation, personally, professionally, across the board, is showing up from that place of empathy, truly trying to understand the other party's needs and their desires. What's their deep why? What are some outcomes that make sense for them and why? And really putting yourself in that, bringing that empathy to the table. And what are ways that I can meet that so that they get what they want as well? I think that's so beautiful, to bring that to that real estate negotiation as well.
Yeah.
So what do you see as some of the key reasons why you would say negotiations fail in your experience?
So, one of the main reasons is people are just focused on what they want, and they're not at all trying to meet the needs of the other person.
Yep.
So if you're not trying to find if you're not trying to find a way that they can win too,
Yeah.
if you're just trying to win and have them lose, then that's not a good strategy.
Yeah.
So especially when you're trying, like, it's, I guess one thing is, in a litigation where there will be a winner and loser, but if you're trying to settle,
Yeah,
right, then you're gonna need, people, like, everyone's gonna have to have something, and you don't, and it's not like, so it's thinking creative, like, how can their needs be met and my needs be met?
yeah,
Not like, how can I get half of what I want and they get half of what I want? But
absolutely. Yeah,
how can I get 100% of what I want and they get
yeah,
100% of what they want? And get, like, how can I think creatively so that they're, because oftentimes people think that, especially with regards to real estate, the only issue is about money.
yeah,
A price, it's all about a price, right? So the seller is only interested in getting a certain price, and they're only interested in getting as much as possible, and the
yeah,
buyer is only interested in paying as little as possible. So that, and if that's, that's where they're as a very hard place to go to. But sellers have a lot of different things that they care about,
absolutely.
and price is um one of them. And for some people, getting the most is important, and they may not be the best person to buy from if you're price sensitive. Other people, it's timing. So
Yeah,
maybe they don't want to, they want to be able to, like, live in the place for another 6 months.
yeah,
And if they'll give it to you for less if you'll just let them live there.
yeah,
Or they want to close really quickly.
yeah,
Like, for less, if you can close really fast, or if they have a certainty that you will be able to do the deal, whereas somebody else might not,
yes.
that they'll do it with certainty. Some people will do it. There was a house that I was going to flip, and it was a craftsman house in LA, and it was in this, it was in this area with a lot of homes that were deemed historic, but this one wasn't. But the
Okay.
seller only wanted to sell it if the buyer would keep it,
Uh,
like, in that style.
yeah, wow.
So he, wasn't about the price. It was really, for him, it was about that he had such a love of the architecture
Yeah,
that he would have, somebody else would have paid a lot more, but if somebody would pay him less but keep that craftsman style, he would sell it.
yeah,
So there are a bunch of different reasons why people will sell, and and often it's not about the price. We
yeah,
got one of our apartment buildings, we offered 50,000 less than the next potential buyer.
yeah,
We got the deal because they thought we would close. They had
yeah,
felt more certainty with us
yeah.
than with this other people, so we got it.
I'm so glad you raised that about it being not just about the money, because I think in so many areas of our life, we mistake that, believing things are just about the money. Again, that win or lose, right? That could, and it reminds me when you were talking about an experience we had with the real estate. We were looking to buy a property. It was up north, and again, you talk about trusting that intuition, right? The seller had built the house himself, raised his family there, and now his kids were all grown and he was older and they were looking to downsize. And my intuition told me, just, you know what, come with the kids in tow, right? Like, show up, because then we knew they were going to be there. And so I trucked our 3 kids and made a point of really conversing and making that connection with the sellers, and, talking about how my husband's, his younger brother had taken over their family farm and business. So we really understood the importance of that. And unbeknownst to us, as it turned out, there was also a conglomerate that was bidding on the property, but they wanted to tear it down and build a little mini resort up there. And so again, who do you think that seller wanted to deal with, right? They had this vision of another family being in that place and being able to raise their kids there. And even though the conglomerate came in higher, they wanted to deal with us. And then it's a matter of getting creative, as you say, and finding, you've got the money. What about a zero? We can't bridge that gap right now in terms of offering you more money, but what about a 0% vendor take back mortgage? Because the interest at the time was much higher and would have actually bridged again. So just getting creative. So I love that you raised that in terms of approach those negotiations with an open mind and a flexibility. And you can really be surprised at the results that you can get, right? I love that. So I want you to talk a bit about, because I know, you do investing work in multifamily homes, in mobile homes, and RV parks. These aren't the typical real estate investments that first come to mind, I think, for most people. So do you want to talk a little bit, like, what is that? Like, how do you invest in an RV park or mobile homes, right? How does that work?
Yeah. So with each different asset class, there's an education you need to have in terms of what's important. How do you evaluate that? What makes for a strong deal or not? And then you have to have the right team in place.
Yeah.
So I don't manage most of my properties. I have third party property managers. So having the right team in place.
Mm.
And I have partners in all of my different asset classes that have a lot. I partner with people that have tons of experience in that asset class.
Yeah.
And we're more on the money side. So I have, I partner with experience and expertise, and that allows me to go a little broader, because if it's just me, then I really need to, I'm
Yeah.
going to have to know it way, with a lot more depth
Yeah.
than than just like I have to get enough depth so I can fully understand it, assess the deal, and make sure it makes sense for me and my investors, but not to the, not with, I can borrow the 40 years of experience of my partners.
Yes.
Right.
Handy. Nice.
Yeah. So that is a way to shortcut if you want to go into these different asset classes. But you will need an education, especially when you're doing commercial, which is, in the US, commercial, anything that's 5 or more units, or other types of real estate. It's a completely different loan structure, valuation structure than most people are familiar with if they've done
Yeah.
is bought their own home. You have to just get that education so you understand how things are evaluated and what makes for a good deal.
Okay. Beautiful. And what would you say are the hallmarks that make a great negotiator in your view?
What makes for a great negotiator? Great, wonderful question. So I think a great negotiator is someone who can really, they can create rapport with the other person. They can really hear the person's interests.
Yeah.
Like, what are their interests, their needs, like what are they trying to meet? And then they can come up creatively. I find that the best, while keeping their own, the negotiator's own interests in mind as well, but really, the way to get to a deal is to, find an agreement with the other party.
Yeah.
So you need to really be able to read them and find out what's important to them, and so you can find that common ground.
Yeah.
Be creative.
I love that. I think that's beautiful. And again, so much that very different philosophy, right? About looking to have power with somebody so that you can rise up together, get more, get better outcomes, more creative outcomes, better buy-in, though, as you say, those longer term relationships, as opposed to always trying to have that power over, get that one over, get that last dime on the table. So I think that's beautiful. And I know some people will be saying, gee, Cindy, did I hear correctly? She talked about being able to get in with zero money potentially. It's a lot of work. You don't have to give the whole thing, because I'm sure there's a lot of education around it, but just to give them a little teaser, what does that involve?
Yeah. And I have a guide that's available for free on my website. Investing in real estate from $1 to $1 million.
Nice.
Investing strategies for every budget and every goddess.
Yeah.
And I go with $1 because I had a mentor that was like, you can't put $0. Nobody's going to believe that. I was like, but it's true. I do. So I actually I share 12 different strategies in that book. Some that require little to no money, some that require little to no time, and some that require that don't require you to deal with the 3 T's: the tenants, toilets, or termites.
Yeah.
So with regards to some of the zero money or the little to no money down strategies, one simple one is to do short-term rental, rent out a piece of your home, a bedroom of your home.
Yeah.
Or if you have another area of your home that could be rented out, rent that out. That's a very easy way to get started.
Yeah.
I have a friend he lives in Hollywood. Really, he has a 1-bedroom apartment, a really great area of Hollywood.
Yeah.
He rented out and he basically paid his rent renting out his sofa bed.
That's wild.
Rented out his sofa bed and covered his rent. So that was one strategy. That's free. Another one that's little to no money is when you stick at a private money lender. If you can find a property to flip, you find the
Yeah.
house, you put together the team, you do the work, that you have a partner who will put in the money. They put in the
Yeah.
money, you do all the work. They put in the liquid equity.
Get it.
They give in the capital, you put in the sweat
Yeah.
equity. And then you go through it. When you sell, they get their principal back and you split the profits 50-50.
Yeah.
That's a very common way of doing it. And you don't have to put in your own money.
Yeah.
Somebody else is putting in the money and you're doing the work. Another strategy that is zero zero to no money is to wholesale. So wholesaling is when you're basically flipping the contract. You
Yeah.
get a property under contract, and then you find another buyer. So let's say you found a property for, the seller is willing to sell this property for $80,000,
Yeah.
and then you have a buyer who will buy it for 90,000.
Yeah.
So you get it under contract with the seller, and then when it closes, the seller gets their 80,000.
Yeah.
The buyer puts down 90,000. You keep a $10,000 wholesale
Yeah.
fee. That's a way of investing.
Pretty creative negotiation options. I love that. I'm glad I asked. And
Those are just some.
yeah, this is perfect. And I'll make sure to post it for everybody in the show notes as well. We'll make sure to post Monique's website and other ways that you can contact her, so you can make sure to pick up that free resource. That sounds great. From $1 to $1 million. Gotta love that. What would you say, Monique, is the most difficult aspect of negotiation that you've experienced in real estate investment? And I don't mean necessarily a particular negotiation, but what's the most difficult part of negotiating, I guess, generally in real estate investment?
Yeah. So it's really hard if you do have a party that's very challenging, that's very
Yeah.
difficult, and you're forced to continue working with them. Right?
Yeah.
So usually there's some sort of out, but sometimes you're kind of stuck in it. Um, and so it's just, again, it's like really listening, really getting to their needs, really figuring out, okay, what's the interest. And sometimes it's like,
Yeah.
it's deep, it's but kind of buried below stuff. So
Yes.
to really, get in there. So that's when it's challenging,
Yeah.
the most challenging.
Yeah, and I find the power of questions can be really great for that. When you're dealing with somebody like that, just allow yourself to take a breath so that you're not reactive, right? Because they're pushing all those buttons, and just really get curious, right? Like, I'm just curious, why is this important to you? Or just asking those digging, because as you say, I find for a lot of negotiations, I describe it like the iceberg, right? I mean, people have their stated needs, which is that tip of the iceberg that you see above the surface. But
Mhm.
so much of what's really driving a lot of negotiations are those unstated needs. And sometimes not only just unstated, but unconscious. Like, you may have sellers who are resistant to selling, and they're not 100% sure why, because they've got that, the attachment to the architecture. I mean, your seller was more aware of it, or in ours, like, oh, I don't want to sell to that particular person because of whatever. And when you unpack some of that, it can open up the door in what otherwise can seem like an impenetrable negotiation sometimes. Would you agree? Or
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
I always want to know. It's like, why do they want to sell? What are they, what are they
Yeah.
like? Their why, like to really get deep.
Yeah.
Um, and then you can find out, like, how can I meet their needs?
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I can't believe how quickly this time has gone by. We're going to have to get you back to do a follow-up, and maybe a real estate investment goddess advanced podcast episode or something. But I normally end by asking, what is one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've ever had in your life? Again, it doesn't have to be about real estate. It can be anything. What would you say is one of the greatest mindset shifts you've had that you can think of?
The greatest mindset shift I've had is knowing that how I feel is in my control, and that it's not others.
Yeah.
I learned this. I was blessed to learn it when I was 20, uh, and it was game changing. So before, it's like somebody did something. I remember, it's like, I had I have a younger sister. She's 6 years younger. We were like cats and dogs. She just knew, like, there were these little buttons she would push, and it would drive me
Yeah.
crazy. And I was like, we'd start to fight. And in college, somebody was studying NLP. Just told me, like, just because somebody does something doesn't mean that you have to react that way. You have control over how you feel. And I
Yeah.
remember going home for a vacation after that, and like the younger sister was like pushing the buttons.
Yeah.
And then it hit me. I was like, oh, I'm not a robot.
I love it.
Like, she pushes the button. I don't, and so it's like, oh, that's a really silly thing to be upset about. It's like, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna do that. And then she's like, push. She's like trying to get like push.
I love that.
And then
And
it was like just completely like deep that trigger. And that's definitely been the most empowering thing I've ever learned.
oh, that is a huge mindset shift. And I was much later than you to come to that realization. I am embarrassed to admit. And boy, what an epiphany that is. Like, there's so much in life that we can't control, but just really taking ownership that we can control how we choose to react. That pot, you've got a stimulus and the response, and you've got that beautiful pause to decide how you're going to choose to react to that. So I love that. And what a beautiful note to finish on, right? Because it's very empowering. There's something really liberating about really owning and recognizing that we get to choose how we show up. We get to choose how we react. So I love that. Well, thank you, Monique. It's been so great having you here. Thanks for all these tidbits. We'll have to make sure to get you back, but I just want to really thank you for coming and sharing all your insights and helping to inspire, encourage women to maybe step up into this non-traditional area. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Cindy.
Yeah, make sure everybody out there as well, check out Monique's website. She mentioned about that free resource on there as well. And you can find her at www.rei, Real Estate Investor Goddesses, so reigoddesses.com. And the same on Instagram. Keep it simple, REI Goddesses as well. You can check her out on both of those formats. And I'm really sure you guys got loads of value out of this episode, or at the very least that it's really whetted your appetite to find out more about this. So again, do check out Monique's resources and maybe consider this for yourself if it's something that you hadn't considered before. So if you don't already subscribe to our podcast, please make sure you do. Make sure to share this episode with any beautiful goddesses that you think might benefit from this and who couldn't. Extra sources of income on a path that allows you to step into your divine feminine. And also just make sure to be sharing the podcast link and get people to subscribe. And make sure, if you haven't already, join our Women on Purpose community at facebook.com/groups/Women on Purpose community. And that's a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom.